This is a brief overview on the use of media in education and in training, and more importantly, the selection of media in the instructional design phases of curriculum and training design. It's important to note right from the beginning that media is interpreted very broadly here. Media, we most often think, is computers, or use of video, or PowerPoints, or what we call multimedia. But media means more than that. People are media as well. Pencils and papers and crayons are media. A classroom whiteboard is a medium. A classroom chalkboard is a medium. A classroom walls are a medium. Everything that has to do with the delivery of instruction, whether it's in the electronic form or in the real world in human form or physical form, is all referred to as media. So we're going to examine this idea of media, and more practically we're going to look at the selection of media to deliver instruction. And I'm actually going to show you a procedure you can use to determine the most effective and efficient media type. By efficient, we mean the media that is most appropriate for the cognitive processes that support the methods of the instruction. By examining the issues and background of media and instruction, you will benefit by, again, selecting the appropriate media that actually supports the methods you're using that support the cognitive processes of learning during a specific learning task. So your media selection will align with the method and the underlying cognitive process. The risk that you avoid is the one that people believe that you can use any media, or a media is popular, we should be using that media, or because they just gave us some technology and therefore we should be using it. And this is a common practice where the technology is used for the benefit of technology and not for the benefit of the learners in actually supporting their cognitive processes. So the outcome I hope that you will have is that you'll select and analyze and select the appropriate media, which means the most effective media to support your methods and cognitive processes of learning, and that you'll also be able to select the most cost beneficial media for your delivery. Let's start our examination of media. Well, in the early 1980s, Richard E. Clark, the same Richard Clark who wrote Turning Research into Results, conducted a number of studies on the use of media in instructional technology. He discovered that in these studies that media had very little to do with student achievement, with learning achievement, that the methods underlying the media were the true causes of the change in behavior or the achievement of learning goals. Clark asserted that the media influences learning as much as a grocery delivery truck influences our nutrition. Well, this became a very controversial and widespread notion that immediately caused people to fall into one of two camps. Media and instruction matters, and media does not matter. What matters is the methods. Well, this controversy continued for some time, but the people who said the media did matter eventually agreed with Clark. It's really the methods that are the causes of a change in behavior, the causes of learning. Clark used the example of acetylsalicylic acid, commonly known as aspirin. Well, you can receive aspirin in many different forms, but it's still acetylsalicylic acid. You can get aspirin in the form of a topical ointment, in the form of a pill or a capsule or a shot. So the delivery of acetylsalicylic acid can be multiple and vary depending upon the context, but it's still the active ingredient in pain relief is the acetylsalicylic acid. Once we accept the fact that media is just a delivery vehicle for a method, we can then begin to look at methods a little bit more deeply. The table that you see has the basic components of the guided experiential learning framework. So you'll see it has objectives, reasons, conceptual knowledge, etc. These are not the only components of the gel, but they're the main ones and good for illustration purposes here. Notice in the second column we have the instructional method. So when we state an objective to our learners, we are describing that objective. We are describing the reasons. We are describing the conceptual knowledge of any new terms that they need to know. Notice then that the when and how demonstration is describe and demonstrate. We not only describe this is what you're going to learn to how to change a tire, and here are the steps, but I'm now going to show you how to change a tire. Come with me and I'm going to change this flat tire and show you how to do it, to demonstrate. And then there's this idea of the method called practice, where the learner is also changing the tire, if you will, or practicing the procedure. And then feedback. And feedback, it contains a method of describe, demonstrate, and practice. So all three of them. So if we look at this and realize that the method here is describe and demonstrate, practice, and describe, demonstrate, and practice, that these are basic fundamental methods. Let's examine what these methods mean to us then. What's the components of the method? In other words, we're going to go deeper here. So what is the method called describe actually comprised of? What are the components of the method describe? Well, there's three components to describe. It's present, observe, and analyze. This is similar to what you may know about the communication cycle, in which you're looking for the actual return of understanding, if you will. Once you're talking to someone, like in giving a presentation, you get that feeling that they are listening, they are understanding, and that comes back to you because you're wondering, are they with me or are they not? Well, it's a similar way. These three elements then of present is you can present something in many different ways. You observe to see what happens when you present. You observe the effect of the presentation, if you will, and then you're analyzing as to what effect it may have had. Did they understand? Is this are they doing what I'm asking to do? So you're asking yourself. It's an analysis of the effect called, after your observation, the analysis of the effect of the present action. So these are the three different components then of this method called describe. Let's look at another one, describe and demonstrate. Well, this method obviously takes describe one step further, because in demonstrate you're actually not only describing by presenting and observing and analyzing whether or not your description has been effective, but you're also doing something. You're actually performing the procedure, performing the steps, performing what is being asked of the learners. And then you're also, as you perform it, again, you're observing and analyzing to see whether or not the learners are comprehending or understanding your performance or demonstration of a task. Well, if the three components of describe as a method are present, observe, analyze, then note in this table then that there can be many actions that you can take to present. You can present by text, write it down, give a handout, write something, a Word document, by voice, action, image, etc. You also can observe in different ways by different actions of the component observed. You can observe a state, some state that someone is in. You can observe actions that they take or the answer that they give. And analyze, you're analyzing, again, you have taken the action of state, or analyzing the action sequence as the person is changing the tire in their practice and feedback and assessment. You're looking to see whether or not the sequence of events are correct. Otherwise, your tire or your car may actually collapse on the flat tire. So the point is here is that the instructional method does not equal actions. Could be many actions, different actions that you can take for each one of the components: present, observe, analyze, for one instructional method called describe. Well, I hope you're able to follow along with that, and it got a little deep, but there's a main point here. I mean, what's the takeaway? What's it all about? How does it really affect what we're doing in curriculum design, and more importantly in the selection of media? The idea here is that methods are different than actions. Instructional methods are different than actions. You can have many different actions to achieve the same method, okay? And the final takeaway from this is that there may be multiple types of media that are available to perform the same instructional actions. So again, you have an instructional method. There's multiple actions to perform that method, and there's multiple media to perform each one of the actions. In other words, we have to carefully think about what's the appropriate media for the appropriate action that is going to be aligned with the appropriate method. By now you're probably familiar with this instructional media selection procedure. It's in the Clark et al. Book chapter that you've read, and it's also in the template and in various emails. The procedure has the three components to it, and feel free to stop the video at any time and examine this. But the three components have to do with any particular, does the actual requirement of practice and achieving the learning objective require any special sensory, tactile, or anything outside of the ordinary in sound or in visual? Does the learning task, does it require that a authentic environment, the conceptual or the conditions for practice, they have to be authentic, and does it require that you have immediate and corrective feedback, etc.? Okay, so these three are added to the fourth, that if your media that you're considering can achieve the answer to 1, 2, and 3, then you have various options in the media. If it can provide the sensory requirements, if it can provide the authentic conditions, and if it can provide the feedback that's required, now you have more media open for you to consider. And of course, what you want to do is take the lowest cost media. By the way, if your client or the demands of your setting are such that you have to be, for example, online, then you discount what your client is asking for, or the demands of the setting. You discount it by what it's worth. So if you have media that's going to cost $10,000 and you really are worth it 50% premium on that, then you could discount the cost of $10,000 by $5,000 and compare it with other types of media delivery, such as the live instructor or a blended environment, etc. So that being said, then let's give you an example of what we mean. A very quick example, and this was an example provided by Dr. Alan Monroe, who taught a class in media selection. His example was a training on starting the generator in an aircraft. As you might know, you normally would start a generator first that supplies power to the engines to help start the engines and the other equipment in the aircraft. So this is a training on starting the generator in the cockpit. So we apply our procedure, our steps for instructional media selection. We first ask ourselves, is there any special sensory or tactile requirements? Well, outside of the normal vision and normal sound requirements there is no special vision or sound requirements, and there's no special tactile requirements either in flipping the switch for a generator start. And again, this is something that's outside of the ordinary when we speak about sensory or tactile requirements. Okay, step 2 is determine if we can achieve conceptual authenticity. In other words, can we replicate the conditions necessary to actually perform the task on the job? And the answer to that is yes, we do need conceptual authenticity. We have to be able to flip the right switch at the right location and as if it were actually in the cockpit. So we do need authenticity. Now you think about what media could achieve that, you may be starting to formulate the idea that we could actually go into a cockpit of an aircraft, or we may start to create a simulation or do a combination of technology and very real authentic practice inside of a plane. And the third step is, do we need immediate feedback? Well, the answer to that is also yes. We need to be able to monitor our actions. We need to be able to see the effect of our flipping the switch and seeing whether or not we've achieved the new state, the observation, and analyze actions again of seeing whether or not the state has changed, and indeed the generator indicating that the generator somewhere in the plane is actually starting. So we do need immediate feedback. And again, we could be thinking about all the potential media. Is it live? Can we get that immediate feedback? Probably. If we had a simulation, could it do it? And could we do it in some sort of a blended format? So in this table, here are our results. As you notice across the top, we have been thinking about some of our options as we've been analyzing and taking the steps to determine the correct media. We've thought about real cockpit, real instructors out on the airfield. We've talked about some sort of a mock-up with instructors, like I remember the airplane simulations that Microsoft used to have, and I'm sure that's pretty prominent, pretty well sophisticated these days, or some sort of a simulation. And the result is that we had no sensory requirement. So each one of these could actually work. We do need conceptual authenticity and immediate feedback, and all three of those options could provide that. So what's our next step? Let's determine what the lowest cost might be. To determine the cost, we first ask ourselves, well, how many students are we actually training or teaching? Then we ask ourselves the second question, which is, where are they? Are they all local? Can we achieve the training or the course or the modules locally, or are they spread out? If they're spread out, then perhaps you have travel costs to bring people together for the training, or travel costs for the instructors to go to the learners. And then finally, there's another consideration which is often overlooked, and how often is the training updated? Are you updating the training every year, or your course or the modules here every year, every 5 years? In other words, what's the shelf life of the material that you're actually using here, and how often does it need to be updated? All these costs have to be considered as well. So in the final step, step 4, you determine what's the lowest delivery cost per student. So sometimes we try to do a armchair estimate of costs, and we use just dollar signs. Obviously, just like a restaurant listing, the $1 sign is a low cost, and then 2 is moderate, and 3 is high, and 4 is very high. So we do this like an armchair sort of analysis. In the next slide I'll show you, and you can stop the recording and examine it, that we actually have numbers put together on these 3 options. But all along the thought process is that you've got different options for your delivery, and you're determining what the costs are of each one of these options using the procedure we've just talked about in step 3. As a final example, which media is appropriate here for a course on sauces? So a cooking course, do we have any special sensory requirements? Well, absolutely. So we have to ask ourselves whether or not the best media is a live instructor, chef, and in a real kitchen, a cooking school. And that's what I enjoy going to, is a cooking school once in a while, to learn how to cook wonderful dishes. So can I do this watching TV cooking shows? No, not really. So our media for actually learning how to cook is one in which you should go to a cooking school. So what are the big ideas, the big takeaways here? The active ingredients in instruction are the methods. The methods need to support the cognitive processes that the learning task requires. The media delivers the methods. Methods and actions are different. You can have different actions for the same method. And media can, many types of media, different types of media can perform one instructional action. So the careful consideration of which media is appropriate for the actions that take or comprise the methods that or support the cognitive processes. This analysis is all made through the steps of media selection.